Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome back Steve Mordue. He's a Microsoft MVP and founder of RapidStart, an ISV offering CRM-based solutions built on the Power Platform. You may know Steve from his popular blog where he writes about life in the Microsoft channel. He also has some of the best interviews with Microsoft Business Applications execs that you'll find anywhere. Out of all of this, he recently started a new site, ISVConnectED, and it's a private community for ISVs to talk strategy, ask questions of each other, have discussions, even commiserate a bit about the ever-changing life of a Microsoft partner. We talk here about a whole range of things, including some of the latest updates to Power Platform, the importance of Microsoft's industry solutions and their impact on the channel potentially, the direct CSP program, Appsource, and Salesforce's acquisition of Slack. All right. Well, hey, Steve Mordue, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks, Jason. It's been a while.
It has. We talk, on and off, and this was definitely a good chance to reconnect. A lot of things going on in the space. Seems like news and updates kind of come in waves, and we're in one where there's plenty of stuff to really sink your teeth into, I would say. And I know you've been up to a lot of things too. Yeah, do you want what's sort of new and what's sort of new and exciting in your world these days?
We're definitely doubling down in that ISV space. Lots of motion there. Finally, there's been motion for a while around rev share and stuff like that. That wasn't necessarily happy motion, but now we're actually starting to see under the new leadership with Toby Bowers taking over for Googs. We're starting to see some more action that I think is going to benefit ISVs, particularly around Appsource. The commerce engine still chugging along towards a reality. So there's some things for ISVs to be happy about. At the same time, I think there's some things for ISVs to be unhappy about. And you're obviously aware, given all the issues around ISV and confusion and stuff like that, just trying to find information myself was challenging sometimes. So I took it upon myself to launch an ISV community called ISVConnectED, really just with an idea that we could all, get a bunch of us in there that are all on the ISV side and share things that work, things that don't, just share information that's hard to find elsewhere. And we've got, I think we've got about 100 members so far. So that's starting to get some traction, and excited to see where that's going to go.
Yeah, I can certainly understand the need for a site like ISVConnectED, and you sort of spearheading it makes some sense because I'm guessing a lot of our readers are familiar with who you are as a person who blogs, who does podcasts and interviews, as well as running your own Microsoft partner business and your long background, right, with Salesforce before that. Your blog, has, I would say, some of the best and most opinionated comments of any out there, and that's largely because you write in an sort of an unguarded way. You say exactly what you think. You put in, you pose the most challenging questions that feed into oftentimes into the partner business and what it means to be a partner in this segment.
Well, I definitely try. I mean, I remember first writing the blog, I was maybe focused a little more on technical stuff, and I just thought that was boring. And I had all these opinions about stuff, as you say, I'm opinionated. And so I pivoted that many years ago to just really, writing about whatever I'm thinking about, good, bad, or otherwise. And, there's always some risk as an MVP that you might step on some toes and get kicked out of a program or something. But so far, as long as I'm not violating NDA, I haven't had any real heat from Microsoft. Every now and then I'll get a call saying, hey, we don't think you were really fair on that thing, but they can't kick me out of the program for not being nice and not agreeing with everything they're doing. And I try and give them kudos for stuff they're doing well. It's just the stuff they're doing well doesn't bother me. It's the stuff they're not doing well that bothers me, and it's bother that drives me to write stuff. So
I could see that, yeah. And it also speaks to how many choices partners have to make in response to Microsoft's policies and program, the way they form their programs, right? Because how those programs are governed, or the rules around them have a direct impact on what you're going to do and how you're going to plan your year, your products, your prices, your licenses, support. I mean, anything that has to do with what you're going to market with as a business is going to tie into that. So it really, it makes total sense why you'd want to be thinking about it.
And it hasn't gotten easier. You would think that over time things would get clearer and simpler and easier, but it seems like maybe it's just the age we're in now that over time things get more complex, more confusing. And I can look at every decision that's made and I can understand why it was made, but then you look at the confusion that it creates and you're like, man, I wish there was a better way to have done that, but I don't have a better way. I would certainly suggest it if I did.
Yeah, it's that combination of where like partner program rules meet licensing rules is that sort of core of like not chaos, but just complexity. It doesn't get any more complex than those two things combined. I think like you wrote about this. I mean, you didn't say that exactly, but in talking about like direct CSP changes recently, you blogged about this, and there were some interesting comments. I mean, the thing I took from that was, you and other partners are just now you just have to sort of untangle this for every single of your clients in whatever way sort of suits them best, while still not undermining your own activities.
Yeah, different parts of Microsoft. Most of my interactions with Microsoft are with the business applications group, James Phillips' organization, which is a smaller group inside the overall of Microsoft, and you definitely feel like you can have more impact there on things that are doing changes and stuff like that. But then when you get out into the partner network, that's a massive organization, and they can tend to be arbitrary and make decisions that I understand why they're making the decision, but my issue really with that was I didn't think they were being very forthcoming about the real reasons. But I get it, but there's those two faces, and I feel like I have more capability to influence the smaller group, which is where I spend most of my time, than certainly I do the larger group.
Yeah, I mean, going back to that, some of the changes like the direct CSP, for example, can you talk a little bit more about some of the issues that you are wrestling with on that, or maybe some of the decisions you've made?
Well, I think that the one thing that I think probably annoys me the most was they basically almost begged us, the partners at our level, to get in that program when they launched it, because CSP through Disty was still very bumpy at the time, and so they were looking for scale, and so they kind of lowered the bar to entry to become a direct CSP, and waved a bunch of us in. So now years have passed, and they're looking back at their cost, and they're looking at Disty having gotten better at what they're doing, and I think they just kind of decided that hey, you guys that we let in back then, we'd like to shove you back out now if you don't mind, because we don't really want to deal with you. And the way they did that was it's been a couple of steps. The first thing they did a year or two ago was they introduced a mandatory partner support. You had to buy their advanced support for partners, which was about $15,000 a year, not inexpensive. And I'm sure a whole bunch of direct CSPs probably dropped out at that time, just not even making enough margin to justify that cost. We were probably about even. That's probably about what we were making in annual margin. And so I ended up sticking around, just figured, okay, well, now we make nothing on licenses because we're giving it right back to Microsoft in this support. But in our particular case, as a specific partner dealing in a specific platform, we knew it very well, so we never used support. I never opened a single ticket. So it really felt like a tax. And so I stopped paying for it just to see what would happen. And, of course, got warned that, oh, my God, your world will end if you stop paying for that. Well, nothing happened. So now they're bringing it back again. And this time, I guess they're going to enforce it being mandatory, and combined with increasing the minimum revenue to Microsoft from $100,000 to $300,000, so tripling the amount of money Microsoft needs to be making from you as a direct CSP, and imposing this mandatory support is clearly a move, regardless of how they characterize it. To me, it's clearly a move to just get rid of all the smaller partners that are in there. And I think, if they were to say that, it'd be hard to argue. If they were to say, look, you small guys you just don't make enough money. It's too much work. And we've got another motion for you. That'd be one thing. But, to try and characterize it as, insurance or something like that, it just didn't sit well with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't really straightforward. What about that other option that the direct CSP option has improved over the last couple of years? Are you buying that?
For us, I hadn't noticed any difference. I mean, it seems to work pretty much the same as it did when we started. But, again, they kind of do these ham-handed moves where they make this decision, and I understand it, but then there's all these caveats. What about a partner that's never opened a support ticket? Does he really have to pay for support? And, okay, if he has to move, what about these embed SKUs that he's been selling? How's he going to sell those? What about customers that bought and are still on older SKUs that haven't been they've been removed? They can't buy anymore, but they can continue to buy the ones that they have. I mean, I can't sell them anymore to new customers, but old customers could continue to buy them. What happens when they transition? Are they all going to be skewed up to the latest SKUs, or is a lot of that grandfathered stuff going to go away? So there's definitely unanswered questions there about that move.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine how many different difficult questions there are to deal with. I will say from my side, it seems like there has now been a push from various direct, like big sort of distribution type of direct CSPs to really try to specialize in the Dynamics 365 and Power Platform space. Now I know a few of them advertise with us, and you certainly see them at conferences and trade shows. So I do wonder, if that will become sort of the default option now for a lot of these firms that don't have a fit with the.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason we switched to direct at the time because we were with a distributor and they just were handling it so poorly. I mean, I remember all the way back to when they first announced CSP and said on the stage, "This will all be available through your distributor," and looking around at the distributors in the room, all looking like they didn't know what they were talking about. Right. It was like Microsoft had kind of assumed this motion, but hadn't brought the disties in to let them know what was up, and that was kind of the start. And disties kind of stumbled all over themselves for a while. But I have heard from some other partners since I wrote that post that disties are much better now than they were. So it's probably a viable option,
And is this a topic that other partner or ISV types are talking about? Is this a topic of conversation on ISVConnectED, for example?
It's come up over there. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of partners that are CSP direct, and essentially, for anybody that doesn't know, CSP direct just means that I can directly sell licenses and provision them on a customer's tenant without having to go through a distributor. It's an alternative for the customer to them buying it direct from Microsoft. And the real idea for the ISV was the ability to kind of bundle a Microsoft SKU with your own IP and sell it as a single item, which has some appeal to a lot. It had more appeal to me when we were built on top of the enterprise app because it had significantly more margin when you were selling that license. But when they launched the platform, we immediately dropped underneath to the $40 Power Apps license, and then when they launched the passes at $10, we dropped down to those. So the margin on a $10 license is not that much. So my interest in making revenue on the license margin is not what it was before because there's just not much there. And then they just launched a few days ago another promotion around that pass where now instead of $10, it's as low as $3, if you've got a minimum of 200 users. But actually, if you think about it, any number of users over 60 users start saving money all the way up to the 200. So I mean, at $3, there would literally be pennies of margin for a reseller in that. So absolutely not worth it for us to do it now. So now I'm resigned to getting out of direct CSP, which is fine. But yeah, I'm concerned about the bumpiness of that transition.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the overall sort of business model of the Power Platform or Power Apps specifically, perhaps. And oh wait, did that offer include Power Automate also? I forget.
So that's the pass, the
Okay,
$3 one.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the Power Apps per app pass, which is what we've kind of teed up our Rapid Start solution to sit on top of because it was the lowest price license they had. So think about that for a minute. If you've got 200 people in your organization, which is a decent sized sales organization, and our Rapid Start is now free, we can talk about that in a minute. For $600 a month, you could have an enterprise CRM system for a team of 200 salespeople. That's just boggles the mind. I mean, we're talking about, not that long ago where, you'd have been looking at thousands and thousands of dollars a month for 200 people to have a CRM system. And now $600. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, that is amazing. I mean, and like I said, I mean, I just keep watching the sort of the trying to piece together what Microsoft's view on all this is. I think they're just going for critical mass on Power Apps.
Well, part of it, and that's why you see the offer they just launched was $3 for a minimum of 20, and the per user Power App that was $40 is now it's like $12, but that's a minimum of 5,000. So these are directly tied to enterprise customer deals. And from talking to some folks on the team, this they were just having to continuously negotiate agreements with people. They had large quantities trying to get lower prices. So
yeah,
I think
they always ended up in that range anyway. So
I think that's what they did. They just kind of looked across and said, look, this is about where we're ending up in these negotiations. Let's just make that an offer, and then we won't have to get on the phone with every customer that comes along. But it's awfully competitive out there, price-wise compared to. I mean, it was competitive before. It was competitive at 40, and then it dropped to when the passes came out. Now suddenly we were looking at 10, and now we're looking at potentially $3. I mean, I don't know where it goes from there.
Yeah, well, I think Microsoft is not known for sort of shying away from trying to sort of win out in a space and crush anyone else who's trying to compete there. So perhaps it's just that again.
Yeah. Well, and as soon as when you stick promotion on the front of something, that means that by definition it's not necessarily permanent. But I wouldn't be surprised if they end up making this permanent because, again, the motivation was partly about growing scale, but I think it was also just, eliminating some back and forth phone calls that we're having to have with every customer. So I don't see why that would stop. So right. I would imagine they would keep that going. I think the success criteria of that program would be that they don't have to have as many phone calls.
Sure. Well, I wanted to touch on I wanted to get through, a couple of other sort of ISV related, I guess you call them concerns or things that ISVs are really paying attention to right now. Another one is, again, I think related to both Dynamics 365 and Power Platform. It's Microsoft's efforts around industry solutions. I had taken note of this. I know you had too, but I had seen, three things in the last couple months that certainly caught my attention to say, Microsoft's a lot more serious about going to market with industry solutions. There's the one that I know you've looked at fairly closely too, the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare. Mm-hmm. There's also the Dynamics 365 fundraising and engagement solution which follows almost the exact same sort of pattern of sort of development. And then there's also, I would categorize personally, it's debatable, but the C3AI CRM offering that's not really Microsoft's, but it's tied in very closely. I think you've written, and I definitely agree. They have in all these cases they've started with, some templates or some accelerators or some sort of starting materials, and then next thing you know, they have a SKU that oftentimes, and I think in both the healthcare and the nonprofit, they both build on work that ISVs have done. In sort of in updating the common data model, for example, with industry specific capabilities, kind of based on that IP or whatever, and now they're moving forward with something that they want to sell, have partners sell directly.
Yeah, I didn't really touch on that particular aspect, although it was brought up to me by some of the other ISVs and folks that participated in helping Microsoft establish those accelerator models. That they've kind of taken our knowledge that was meant to be for this open source initiative, and have now kind of converted it into a paid product, still containing our knowledge. So I could see how some of those folks might be a little annoyed. I think their move to this cloud, and I've got to assume that each one of these accelerators is going to follow the same path, provided there's a big enough market. Obviously, healthcare was plenty big enough to convert into a product. There's Salesforce has these clouds too, these industry clouds. So there's competitive forces at work here, and I think that as much as Microsoft has been pounding all of us that we need to get vertical, not enough of us have done it, and not enough of us have done it deeply enough. And if I'm Microsoft, I mean, again, I didn't like the move, but I couldn't blame them for doing it, because if you're waiting for your ISV community to capture an opportunity that's in front of your face, how long do you just look at that opportunity before you just act and say, okay, we gave you guys a chance and you didn't move or didn't move fast enough, and so we're going to take it. So I'd probably do the same thing if I were in their shoes. So I don't like the move. I think as an ISV, it's a little unnerving. But I mean, that's been the case for a while with Microsoft for ISVs. Ever since, really, I think even a small thing. I remember it was quite some time ago, they launched this thing called editable grids. And it was a big deal. It's not a huge thing, but it was a big deal for users. But there were at least 2 or 3 ISV solutions out there for editable grids that just got, basically wiped off the planet with that one little move. And then after that, sometime after that, we saw, and I'm sure lots of little features like that just became part of the core and eliminated ISVs. And then we saw marketing, when they launched Dynamics for Marketing, straight in right square in the space of their biggest ISV at the time, Click Dimensions. And that seemed like, ooh, that's an interesting move. And now these industry clouds, with finished applications for healthcare, and then pretty much telling us there's still plenty of ISV opportunity around those, but I'm not convinced that that's the case either. So, but you kind of see a pattern here. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to an ISV doing a little consulting, and they were trying to say, where's the safe place to be? Because horizontal isn't safe, because that's just feature level that Microsoft could introduce at any time. Oh, no, look at this, editable grids. Boom, there went some horizontal solutions. Vertical, well, if the vertical that you're looking at is huge, and there's lots of money involved, you definitely have to worry that Microsoft may come along and say, yep, we like that vertical. So you got to almost drop down a level or two where the potential market opportunity is still big enough that you can make money at it, yet not so big that it would get on Microsoft's radar.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's the sweet spot there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can think of a couple that I know that, and look, Microsoft has sort of, I don't know what you call them exactly, but I'm sure there's a name for the role, but, a group of people who are solely focused on supporting strategic ISVs in building their businesses out. And that team is still in place. And just, I'm trying to think of sort of the verticals or the segments where they really have seemed to put a lot of effort at, like, I think, education, automotive, probably, I'm sure there's others too. There's a couple that pop into my mind where I've heard that, Microsoft is sort of very strategically supporting certain ISVs because I think they can bring them into big enterprise deals. I don't know that they ever had anyone like that in healthcare. And I don't think the nonprofit, thing is really quite at that level, sort of size wise or what they're targeting with it. But yeah, I think it'll be this weird balance and being aware of it as an ISV is critical. I mean, if you can get any indication that there's something coming down the pike, 6 months or a year ahead of when it actually comes out, that's got to be hugely valuable to sort of adjust.
Well, and then I think depending on where you're at, you got to hope that Microsoft misses the target.
Right.
And I mean, when they launched Dynamics for Marketing, I'm sure ClickDimensions was shaking in their boots a little bit, but it wasn't a good product at launch. It had lots of problems, lots of issues, and that allowed ClickDimensions to kind of relax.
And interestingly, it's actually other marketing automation vendors have now entered the space in the last year, which is after a time when there didn't seem to be any joining. There's at least 2 or 3, established marketing automation vendors now playing much more actively in the space alongside ClickDimensions.
Well, and we saw one attempt with John, the former John Gravely, who passed this past year.
Yeah.
With the Sales Spark, where he put together a team and thought he saw an opportunity and went after that. And shortly off the ground, Microsoft suddenly launches sequences as part of their application, which was kind of like the core of Sales Spark, was this idea of these sequences, and suddenly it's part of the core solution, and he literally just pulled the plug on the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So it's a risky spot for ISVs. Microsoft, on the one side, they'll say, we're going to be a platform, or we're always going to be we want to be a platform company, but then they make these moves that are quite vertical.
Yeah, there's so many factors. I mean, I think if an ISV has an established channel, I mean, just to go back to the ClickDimensions example, because they're so well known, they have a very healthy, channel of resellers who understand their product really well, who can champion it, talk about it, implement it well.
I think they took advantage of some Microsoft stumbles. Mm-hmm. One of the things that everybody in our business knows is if you're working with a customer and you can get them using your product and using it successfully, you become very hard to displace. It's one of the reasons it's so difficult to get people to leave Salesforce to go to Dynamics or vice versa. It's just that's a huge undertaking to move. And so if you can get a product like ClickDimensions in, which they had for many years, the customers using it, when Dynamics popped up with their marketing app, most of those ClickDimensions customers were like, yeah, it's fine. We're not going to move. We got too much invested, we know the product. We're not going to switch. And I think it was really going to be more of a grab for new customers going forward. And then when marketing kind of stumbled out of the gate a little bit and was buggy and stuff like that, I think ClickDimensions turned on the most aggressive sales motion they'd ever had to go try and capture customers while Microsoft was kind of on their heels. But Microsoft is they're slow and steady. They don't quit. They just keep plugging and actually the Dynamics for Marketing solution is a pretty solid solution now. And there's a roadmap for some pretty impressive stuff to happen with that. So, final chapter hasn't been written on that one yet.
No, certainly not. Another one I wanted to, kind of a little bit of a separate area, but still related to ISVs, I did want to ask you about. You had mentioned in passing some updates to Appsource that you are encouraged by. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so I did an interview with Toby Bowers. I did a podcast a while back. As a matter of fact, we're due to have a follow-up on that now when he first kind of took over the reins from Googs. And, Toby's been around Microsoft a long time in the marketing org under Alyssa Taylor. And he had a lot of ideas and was open to a lot of ideas and a lot of suggestions and had promised that there will be some movement. And I think one of the areas a lot of ISVs, they're either are very concerned about or have just lost interest in was Appsource. It's ever since it launched, it had such incredible potential, but just never came close to realizing it. And they talk about 4 million daily views or something of them, just some massive amount of people that are coming to that site, but it's not converting. And I think a lot of that was just, a poorly designed commerce engine. And it's been that way almost since they launched. I was involved in the pilot before they even launched it, and you look at it today, it looks almost the same. So lots of talk and not a lot of action on Appsource, but now I'm seeing some stuff with Toby's group. As a matter of fact, even if you go in there today and you click on an app, the actual app profile page has been changed from what it was before, based on feedback and stuff like that. And the next thing that'll be coming will be the homepage and search experience, because that was the thing that was really challenging about it. When somebody goes to Appsource, they're not just accidentally run into it on a search. They have intent. They're looking for a solution to a particular problem. They're also not just wanting to go to Appsource to see, hey, what might be out there. They're going there because they have a particular need they're trying to find a solution for, and that was not an easy thing for a customer to do. They could, wade through, tons and tons of irrelevant apps that didn't have anything to do with what they were doing, finally just give up. So I think a lot of the effort here that we're going to see launching very soon on Appsource is all around that. Customers arrived, let's get them as quickly to as short a list of specific applications that are relevant to what they're looking for. So if they're able to succeed in that, then maybe Appsource could, like I say, 4 million active users are coming into that thing.
Right.
They're obviously not finding what they want. So it either doesn't exist as an app, or the thing's just too clumsy for them to get to what they want.
Yeah, and it's such a shame with so much. I mean, when you talk to ISVs, almost universally, there's just the amount of time that teams have to spend getting their material in there for no reason other than, at this point, a lot of them say it's mandatory, even though there's not a lot of benefit. It's really unfortunate, and it can't change soon enough in that regard.
Yeah, no, it's not mandatory. You can join ISVConnect, and you don't have to put anything in Appsource if you don't want to.
I guess that's true. I never even thought of that.
Yeah, but we might as well. On the off chance, we've gotten some business from Appsource, just nowhere near the level that you would expect it should have been or could have been. So, it certainly is worth taking that step to put it in there. It's some effort to put in, some effort to maintain. But, I think there's also a misconception still from a lot of ISVs. Well, I don't want to pay the rev share, so I'm not going to use Appsource, and those two are not even connected.
No, that's not going to work.
Yeah, they're not connected motions. They have nothing to do with one another. So I think I still hear that at least once a week from some ISV. Yeah, we were looking at Appsource, but we didn't think it was worth the 10%. I'm like, yeah, well, you're obligated
it's
for
the
10% regardless.
Right, yeah. Right. You can still sell. You don't have to be in Appsource, but that 10% is still there, whether it's listed or not. Yeah. I have to say, one of the, just thinking kind of current events here, one of the things that seems to have, at least so far, gone off without too much of a hitch is the transition of common data service branding. Dataverse
gone off without a hitch. Did you miss the DataFlex debacle?
I was thinking, I meant post DataFlex.
Okay. Well, gone off without a hitch after the huge hitch.
Yes. I meant as compared to that. I did, I spotted, I haven't heard many people else mentioning it, but Dataverse was not original. There's a trademarked sort of open source project called Dataverse.
So clearly,
no one seems to care about that. As far as I can tell.
Clearly, Microsoft reached some sort of an agreement. Obviously, the DataFlex thing was an embarrassment for them and something that was not vetted at all. So you have to know that Dataverse was fully vetted, and if someone had a trademark, that some agreement was reached to use that name. It probably doesn't hurt that Gates is such a huge contributor to Harvard. Maybe they pulled that card. I don't know, but Dataverse it is, and it's a perfectly fine name. Common data service sounded more like a description of a product than a name of a product, I think. Lots of customers and partners alike were confused the difference between common data service and common data model. I think that was a lot of what drove that decision to let's give this product a brand name as opposed to a description and as the name. I think there's more controversy right now, less around Dataverse than this idea of renaming things that we've historically known as, entities, records, fields.
Okay.
So
You're hearing more friction on that.
yeah, more confusion. I think that, and I get the reason, because this is, again, a lot of what's happening right now is driven by citizen development aspirations. And, Dynamics partners have been in the space for a long time. We definitely understand the lingo, we know what it means, but people from the outside don't. And, obviously a database table, everybody knows table if they've had anything to do with database. So that seemed like, instead of entity, table would be an easier term for citizen developers and people coming to the platform to grasp what that was. But yeah, a bunch of grumpy guys that have been around, and gals that have been around a long time, calling them entities, and also trying to make the point that an entity was always significantly more than a table. I mean, there's a table there, but there's a lot more going on in an entity, and that kind of calling it a table was not doing it justice. So I still hear lots of whining and complaining about that change. It doesn't bother me as much. I'm okay if a customer, because I've been on those phone calls with customers that are new to the platform but aren't new to technology, and having to explain to them that well, an entity's like a table. Oh, gotcha, and the light bulb goes off. So I think that's part of the thinking there. Is let's just eliminate the need for some of those light bulbs to have to go off.
Yeah, one of my thoughts around Dataverse in particular, and I think just the push to rename it was really how much of that was focused in Microsoft's mind on bringing this into Teams, and you need a slicker brand. Yep. If you're going to add this new dimension to what Teams offers, and whether it's DataFlex or Dataverse or whatever they came up with, someone said that we need something better.
Yeah. No, I think I agree, and so now we have Dataverse, and we have Dataverse for Teams. I think that I struggle with. We have the same problem with Power Apps, where they're trying to share names across products that are not the same. And at least with Dataverse, they put a caveat on Dataverse for Teams, as opposed to what really people should think of it as Dataverse Pro and Dataverse Lite, because Dataverse for Teams is Dataverse Lite. It doesn't have the capabilities, and anywhere near the capabilities of the full Dataverse. But at least they put 4 teams on there, so people should understand that it's a subset of those capabilities. But we'll see. Customers, partners are confused, and we're inside the circle, so customers have got to be massively confused about things. I still have conversations with customers about Power Apps, because they've got seeded Power Apps capabilities in their Office 365 licenses. Now called Microsoft 365 licenses. So they think they have Power Apps, and then we're selling a solution that runs on the Dataverse version of Power Apps, which isn't what they have. And it just kind of blows their mind when you're trying to have this conversation that, yeah, well, I understand you have Power Apps. You don't have the right Power Apps. You need a different Power Apps. And it just, yeah, I would have liked if they were a little more crystal clear in their delineation of these similar products that are, different.
Because without the CDS or Dataverse below it for the seeded licenses of Power Apps, you're then left to connect to your own data source.
SharePoint. Yeah.
Use a SharePoint list.
Yeah. SharePoint list and things like that. Yeah, it just doesn't bring in. It doesn't bring in the Dataverse.
That's really what Microsoft, I think, wants to get away from. Right? They don't want Power Apps to be seen as a top layer to SharePoint long term. There's a whole segment of the sort of Power Platform community that's kind of it seems to me anyway, that's sort of their worldview is let's build Power Apps and let's put them on top of lists primarily.
I think it's coming out of the Microsoft 365 side of the house, which is different than the business applications group side of the house. Right. We're sharing a product name, but completely different skill sets and completely different backgrounds. And it reminds me of back in the day, working with customers who had built a CRM system out of SharePoint. When we have a CRM system sitting right over here. But more often than not, the argument would be, yeah, but this is included in my license. So I don't have to pay extra for it because I already get it. And that'll be the same thoughts with Power Apps. So we're going to see plenty of Power Apps built on top of SharePoint because, it's included in their licensing. Moving over to Dataverse, obviously adds a significant more dimensions to what you can do with that, but it brings in a cost. It brings in a new cost. And I think that's definitely one of the things that, we're kind of past the days where people looked at SaaS, I think, as, well, I just buy it once and own it versus renting the software. I don't want to rent it. That's kind of become the norm now that, it's going to be SaaS and you're going to pay something every month. But, there's certainly a high motivation out there for people to pay as little as possible. They're not looking for excuses to increase their recurring revenue or recurring costs. So,
right, and they do get more now with their Teams access to Teams. Now they do get access without any additional cost, right? To Dataverse for Teams to build those sort of light applications.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of us in the business application space think in terms of big complex applications because those are the ones that we make the most money building and supporting and stuff like that. But there's a much larger world of check-in, check-out applications, little apps that are never going to be. They might be very important, but they're never going to be complex. Don't need to be. And I think that that Dataverse for Teams and the seeded Power Apps are perfect for a bunch of that stuff. So, and we're going to see, as we have seen, even with the Power App stuff, where citizen developers starts building something, and it's a handy little app, and suddenly more people in the organization start using it, and all of a sudden you look up one day, and this little app that was built in the corner of the building has become mission critical, and they're realizing that they really didn't have any understanding of a data model, a security model. And oh my God. And then that's when you get the call to the partner, like somebody over on a business application side to come in and, let's tighten that thing up since it's now mission critical. So I think that my conclusion now after watching the citizen developer motion for a couple of years is that it's actually generated more work for partners than before.
Interesting. Yeah.
What has taken off our plate was busy work, was work that, anybody could do. And if you built a practice making a living on doing stuff that anybody could do, you were always at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I have a couple of other podcast episodes coming out soon that may even be out by the time this is out. I'm not sure, but with Power Apps, experts from bigger system integrator Microsoft partners, and governance and center of excellence stuff is some of the is what they're most enthusiastic about to some degree in the whole Power Apps, Power Platform story is what that's doing to allow them to do, like you said, bigger, more ambitious projects with their clients.
Yeah, I mean, and this isn't just Microsoft, right? All the platforms are moving towards no code, low code. It's a huge movement just in the technology space right now. I think people are frankly tired of paying customizers ridiculous amounts of money to do everything. so there's a lot of appeal with customers wanting to kind of DIY the tools. And I think it's interesting because the COEs, the Center of Excellence stuff came out, what was it, about a year or so after the launch of Power Apps. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with enterprise customers that just were, not comfortable with a bunch of apps being built by, everybody in the company without some kind of governance. And so I think the COE was intended really to make that big customer feel comfortable. Look here, you've got control. It's not just a bunch of internal shadow IT anymore. Because that's what it was becoming. You've got your true shadow IT where some guy is taking his personal or business credit card and signed up for a subscription for some service nobody even knows he has, and he's pumping data into it, which is not good. But then when Power Apps first launched, it was a bunch of internal shadow IT. Some guy in the loading dock built a little app nobody was aware of but him and his buddies. So the Center of Excellence just kind of wrapped big arms around all that stuff. To give IT some comfort that they can govern that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, from my perspective, just I was perhaps underestimated how important people see that. But yeah, it's seems to be a hit at this point.
Yeah, I tell you, it's funny. I talk to customers all the time, and they're all concerned about their data, even if their data is not that important. I was talking
You
to
don't tell
one.
them. You don't tell them that, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I don't tell them that. But I get, obviously medical records of individuals very important, got to be protected. But some customers feel like their business records need to be protected at the same level, and the value in those records is really only to them. But so the perception is real that we need to be able to govern. We need to know what's happened to this data, where it's going, who can get it, regardless of whether it's important data or not. Everybody thinks it's important. So center of excellence goes a long way towards towards making those folks a lot happier.
Well, Steve, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least ask you, given your past experience with Salesforce, and we're talking about Teams and Power Platform, you've undoubtedly heard about the Slack acquisition by Salesforce. It's interesting in obviously a bunch of ways from people sitting on the Microsoft side of the world. I don't know, what's been your reaction to that one so far?
It's my first reaction was I think they paid about the same thing that Microsoft paid for LinkedIn. And my first thought was, I can't imagine that Slack could be worth anywhere near as much as LinkedIn, but Slack's got a lot of users. And I think it was also strategic for Salesforce. They didn't really have an answer to Teams for customers that were using it. And Salesforce has some of their tools, Chatter, things. They have some of their own tools, but most of probably Salesforce's customers are using Microsoft 365 already because they were never involved in that side of the business. So if you've got your customers are all using Microsoft 365 and Teams is included in Microsoft 365, and now suddenly your business applications can spawn out of this Teams tool, which Salesforce is kind of outside looking in. I see the reason for them to make the move. And I fully expect that we'll see similar moves with Slack going forward, with something almost like a Dataverse for Teams motion from Salesforce around Salesforce in Slack to try and answer that. Microsoft launched this healthcare cloud in no small part because Salesforce has one. So they still they still watch what each other's doing and have to answer tit for tat.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, one of the thoughts I've had is over the last, 2-3 years, maybe, as Dynamics has, before that, Microsoft CRM was always under pressure for trying to compete with Salesforce. I felt like, even though they didn't really do it that well, and they never got, obviously never got parity.
They didn't gain on them.
Never gained on them. Yeah, for all the work.
Dynamics could be growing at 400%, and Salesforce was still growing faster. So they weren't even gaining at the time.
They were. I feel like the product management was driven by what Salesforce was doing a lot of the time. They were later to SaaS, obviously. But then when Dynamics 365 was sort of reorganized product-wise, with the layers separated out in a really nice, rational way, it felt like it took the pressure off of that sort of tit for tat type of competition to let Microsoft focus on its strengths, even if it wasn't, and I think the overall result has been positive for Microsoft. The growth seems to be positive in the business applications groups, still not equal to Salesforce, but I would argue that Microsoft can't be, the Dynamics CRM's team can't be Salesforce. Microsoft will never be that, right? But now
I think better late than never. You're right. I mean, they were certainly very slow to move to the cloud. They were slow to react, and they were like a little kid chasing the big kid across the playground. You're just never going to catch him. You're just hoping to follow in the footsteps. And I think it probably has mostly to do with when Phillips came in and the new team with Phillips and Alyssa Taylor, and you're coming into the organization just deciding, what, we're not insane. Why do we keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result? And I get the sense that Phillips just started to move Salesforce from the front of his vision off into the periphery, not out of sight, but certainly not square in the front. And then just with a clean slate said, what can we do that nobody else is doing? Yeah, I think that was the big push with the Power Platform, the low code, pro code, or low code, no code, pro code story. And, he's grown that team from about 1,000 people when he started to, was it like 8,000 people in that group now? That's a massive jump in a fairly short amount of time in body count to build stuff. And, they went from competing primarily with Salesforce to suddenly, here we have Microsoft Flow, now called Power Automate, with a whole new set of competitors. They were competing with Zapier and Skyvia and a bunch of these others. Then they launched the Power App low code stuff right into competition with a whole bunch of other new players we never even heard of. They were all already in this no code, low code space. Launched the forms, now customer voice, right into the form building space. The whole bunch of people in that space already. Mm-hmm. So they really went from competing primarily with one big organization to competing with hundreds of organizations.
Yeah, the RPA
in
space.
The process. Yeah, the RPA space, all across the board, is competing with tons and tons of different businesses now. But I still get the sense that while they're keeping an eye on those other companies, they just got their head down saying, let's make this thing as good as we can make it, and everything else will, shake out in the wash. But they did have I thought they had a myopic focus on Salesforce when we first joined for quite some time. But I think I was just the leadership at the time, which ironically I think is mostly over at Salesforce now.
Yeah, Bob Stutz went from Microsoft to Salesforce, and now he's at SAP, I believe.
Jujar went there.
Yeah. And opinions are all over the place, whether this is a good move from Salesforce or not. I think, to me, the strongest part of it is, Salesforce's and I guess Mark Benioff's ability to sort of bring the spotlight back to himself and align up against Microsoft. I mean, that's it's a great story and a great angle that the press loves.
He's been good at that for many years.
Yeah. And it died out. I mean, he lost that ability when Microsoft took away the fuel to a large extent.
Yep.
But it's back now. And, for whichever way it sort of breaks over the next couple of years, it's there.
Well, for that kind of an investment, that kind of money, that was not just a good investment. That had to have been strategic. So they've got to have much bigger plans for Slack than just let's just add it to our stable of products. Because just like with Microsoft paid as much as they did for LinkedIn at the time, it wasn't just to own LinkedIn. It was to let's combine this with other things we have to really generate some value out of this investment. So they got to have some big plans for Slack.
If you think about Teams, though, that really came from was that a fully internally developed product from Microsoft? I can't think of any.
Yeah, I don't think that there was any acquisitions involved in that. I think they built that.
I just have to think. You look at the overall total value that Teams has delivered to Microsoft compared to what they would have got by spending something comparable for a Slack at the time. I
guess you would probably have to go back to Skype, right? They did buy Skype.
Okay, that's true. Yeah.
And off of Skype came Skype for Business, which eventually turned into Teams. Yeah, I don't know how much of that original code may exist, but certainly Skype got them started down that path. Yeah,
that's very true. Yeah. I just think that the value that they, and you can say this for other acquisitions in the business application space. I think, things that they've built, I think probably have delivered so much more value than the things that they've acquired.
They definitely have gotten much more strategic than they were in their acquisitions. They're not making nearly as many as they were during like the Jujar Stutz period,
right?
Where they bought a bunch of things that just didn't pan out, a couple that did. Now they seem to. I think before they were kind of like buy versus build was the preference, and now I think it's the other way around. It's really build versus buy is the preference, unless there's something like like the RPA company they recently bought just was going to shoot just save a bunch of development time and get them there quickly, and I think it was also one that they were able to integrate fairly easily, which was something they struggled with some of their past acquisitions. They just never were able to get them integrated too different, too foreign. Just couldn't get them together. And so they definitely seem to be much more thoughtful about the things they're going to buy. I mean, I was talking to somebody here just recently, an ISV, who was looking for some advice on building something, and we're thinking about the possibility that at some point down the road, Microsoft might want to buy them. Well, I thought they were a little too nichey of their vertical that Microsoft would reach that far. But I told them, I said, if you want to try and build something that you think Microsoft's going to buy down the road, you better have that be your plan from the day you start. You got to be real strategic now, because Microsoft's not just buying anybody that comes popping along. You got to really be strategic.
Boy, what a gamble that is to ever make that your goal. You better have some PhD level IP or something that you really think you can count on.
You can look at some of the areas where Microsoft is heading, and now in hindsight we can look back and see like the direction they headed with HoloLens, the direction they headed with a lot of this AI stuff.
Yeah.
And if you recognized their early interest in some of those spaces, and were able to maybe build something that was, that's how Charles Lamanna got brought into the Dynamics group. He built a product for Azure. I don't remember exactly what it did, but it was something having to do with Azure that they ended up acquiring, and that's how he kind of came to be part of Microsoft. But clearly seeing an area that Microsoft might just be noticing, and then hoping that you're nimble enough and quick enough to get something out there, because they're quick to notice, but it takes them a while. They're still a great big behemoth that moves very methodically and very slowly towards a destination. You can kind of see them walking. You can see, you can stand behind them and run an eye down the street and see exactly where they're heading, and know you've got some time before they get there.
And then the other side of it is that they have to then see you and decide that it's better to just acquire you than to just rebuild what they see that you've done.
Sure. ClickDimension's a good example, right? I mean, here you have the biggest ISV built this marketing solution over many years, and you have to assume that it was a consideration to just buy them versus build, and they made the decision to build. So
there's been some good coverage of that theme in the sort of the mainstream business press last couple of years, of not Microsoft specifically, but all the big cloud players, doing that sort of thing, looking at these smaller players and deciding, do we buy them, or should we just put our R&D a team into doing basically the same thing.
The biggest reason I think Microsoft would buy something today is speed, because it's going to take them a while to get to that point if they build, and if there's market opportunity that is moving fast, they're not going to want to wait. They're not going to want to, and that was the RPA acquisition. They were
right.
They had launched some RPA capabilities, but that opportunity was too big, and they were going to be too slow to get there without an acquisition. And I think that's probably what really led to that acquisition was more opportunistic. If we probably would rather build it, but we're going to miss a bunch of opportunity as all the time goes by, as our development team slogs through to ultimately get something done versus buy something.
Yeah, you tend to see that also on the Dynamics, on the finance and supply chain management side, that they'll make these little, small scale acquisitions of ISV solutions that plug in entity management or plug in trade something like that, where they just
kind of shorten the path. They're still building the whole thing, but they're bringing in these little parts and pieces to speed up that process.
Right. The other one that just occurred to me, and I covered it, I know, and now I'm forgetting the name of it. I'd have to go look back, but there was this acquisition of this very strange little company that builds industry data models, and I assumed that part of that, if not all of it, was to help enrich the common data model with industry based additional industry based stuff.
Yeah, I don't remember the name either, but I know what you're talking about.
And they were this sort of very unbranded company with almost, you couldn't tell who worked for them or what they'd been around for many years. I think it was maybe a very small company that had just built out this IP.
The industry accelerators, there was a pretty big process behind that, because Microsoft knew going in, we're going to build a healthcare accelerator, but we don't know anything about healthcare. We're a technology company. We need to figure out what that is. And that's the same challenge for ISVs. When you see a space, you think, oh, we should go build something there, but I don't know anything about that business. You gotta get that knowledge from somewhere.
When I looked at the launch of the healthcare cloud that they launched, the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, I mean, it spanned it spanned all three of Microsoft's big areas, Azure, Microsoft 365, and business apps. So they did a big planned, coordinated push, and I think that's the template for future industry plays if we see it in I don't know, automotive or energy or.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll see it in nonprofit necessarily, just because the nonprofit industry is not the most profitable. So they're typically kind of strapped for cash. Although there's some nonprofits out there, Red Cross and stuff like that, maybe. But certainly the finance, I could certainly see them eventually launching a cloud for finance. Automotive, yeah, maybe, Yeah.
Yeah, it could be retail. I mean, retail, manufacturing. Those, we look at what is it? 6 primary. I'm not going to list them here, but 6 primary verticals that they
have the accelerators for.
They identify go at a corporate level. And I think if this healthcare one is panning out in this approach, yeah, I think there's no doubt you'll see more.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Anything else you want to leave us with? Anything that ISVs should know about ISVConnectED, perhaps, or anything else you've got?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I'd love to have any ISVs out there. It's free to join. ISVConnectED.com. It's a community for ISVs. We don't let anybody else in there because we want to have it be kind of a comfortable spot for ISVs. Talk about ISVs. I reject people all the time, entry that are coming in there wanting to try and sell stuff.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine you're starting to see that a bit.
Yeah. So just really focusing on those and, ISV strategies. We recently made Rapid Start free. I've had a lot of people asking about why did you do that? And are you giving up on the idea of recurring revenue? And so it's been a good place to kind of flesh out that conversation. And that's been an interesting experience also, but maybe we'll cover that in another episode.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always fun catching up with you here. I'll certainly look for that. We'll throw a couple links into the description on this as well. Steve, thanks so much for joining and for catching up today. It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Always a good time with you, Jason.
I don't hear that as often as I'd like, but thank you.
All right, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Steve Mordue for joining me today. You can follow Steve on his blog, stevemordue.com, and we talked about ISVConnectED.com today, his new site. If you want to get in touch with me, Jay Gumpert at msdynamicsworld.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.